Well, all right, well, let's start. So thanks for coming down here. I hope you guys are enjoying the food and the drinks. So, you know what these are?
Websites?
These are your typical web and mobile applications that you see these days. And unfortunately, we're all used to this crappy experience by now. When we interact with these apps, say by tapping a button, we know now, we're trained to turn off our brain for a second or two while we wait for the next screen to load. Now, why should we accept this way of living? Look at it, it's crappy. Now, as a web developer, I've been doing this for many years, and I didn't know I was doing anything wrong. How many of you are web developers? I know we already had a conversation. All of you are pretty much web developers. And you will be soon.
I'm working on it, halfway there.
And I know some of you are already native developers as well. Now, back in the day, the only thing that saved us with web applications was something like this. A browser used to have this. It has a little loading indicator to let us know that the next page is loading, right? And pages would take a long time to load, so our brains got that extra time to stitch things together. Things like this. You remember this? Now, elements would show up on the page one at a time, so our brain could process it, and everything was slow, so it's great. Now, with modern single-page web applications and with native applications, the loading indicator, as you typically see, is not going to suddenly appear and read your mind, and likewise, transitions aren't going to happen automatically. We have to do this ourselves. So, why aren't we doing this now? Today, even with everything we know about interfaces, unless you're in a swanky, well-founded new startup, or you're working at Google or Apple, your day-to-day job as a developer is to just make things work. And that translates to allowing user to click a button and have something happen, right? Now there's a missing piece that most development teams miss, and that's the user. As software developers, we slip into this mindset, into a routine where we think like a computer thinks. And it's just, we conveniently forget about these minor interactions. Now there are two types of developers. That's one type. One that completely unaware of this problem. I was this type of developer. These are the happy developers. Now, as a side note, I think that the less you know as a developer, the happier you are, the happier your life is. Now, the other type of a developer is this developer. It's the one that knows but ignores it. Now, whatever the reason may be, like I don't have time, or the manager is looking at the clock, or I don't care, in this case, nice donkey. I want the first group of developers to become aware. And plausible deniability is no longer going to be an excuse that's tolerated. All right, maybe that's just a little harsh. I want to raise awareness, so that's my goal here today. And the second group, we come up with excuses. These are the excuses we have. So animations in interfaces, they take up valuable time to implement. When you're building a product, it's not what's important, right? You've heard this before. Well, of course it's going to take time to implement animations well, but it also makes a huge difference. So the other excuse is this: animations take time out of a user's day to experience. You know, watching an animation, your little movies that you make is going to add up eventually. Now this is partly true if you've done a half-assed job. There are so many bad ways to implement animation, it may just take up the user's time. Now, of course, the counter argument is that if you don't use animations, it's going to take time for the user's brain to process these UI changes, these abrupt changes. Every time a tap on a button happens and things magically just change, like we've seen in the initial example, there is an increase in cognitive load. fMRI studies in cinematography have shown that there's a strong rehash. Lots of brain activity happening in action where a scene just cuts off and switches to another scene. And effectively, the brain has to rebuild the scene from scratch every time it cuts. So these concerns will be addressed today, hopefully. And I'm going to show you some guidelines to follow. First, we need a common language, though. So languages consist of words and phrases, and UI interaction language is made up of its own kinds of words and phrases. Let's call these principles. Now, there's this guy, Isara Williscomer. It's this guy. He's a designer, and he kind of looks like Mark Zuckerberg, but with a more difficult name. He wrote a really amazing UX in Motion manifesto. It's roughly based around the 12 principles of Disney animation. I don't know if you're familiar with that one or not, except that it's specifically for user experience. And he really breaks down interactions into their atomic properties. So there's 12 of these, and these are the principles. We'll see some of these in action today. Now I want to talk about some of these today, specifically the most important ones that we encounter, the most common ones. This one, easing. All objects in the real world, they ease. Easing creates a sense of natural motion. If you let a computer do the animation for you, it's just gonna come out crappy and be linear. You've probably seen that before. You should always specify some kind of easing function for your animations. Don't just leave this to the machine to decide. Next one is offset and delay. Offset and delay define a relationship between objects. So this principle continuously lets the user know how to interface with the objects before they even think about it. An example of this is a list that's shown on the screen, and each item is shown on the list with a slight delay. And that lets us know that there's more items, they're individual items, so we can follow that. In Angular, there's an animation called stagger. You've probably seen this, it's a new one. Next one is called parenting, and this creates a spatial and temporal hierarchical relationship. What does that mean? Now, for example, when directly manipulating one object, another object is going to simultaneously follow this. I'm talking about, now I'm talking about UI and touch screens. You've seen this before probably, where you're moving one object and another one moves.
Alex, so are all the Angular 4 animations in NativeScript as well? I mean, like all the...
So most of them are.
Okay.
And I should say most of the ones that are defined declaratively are. But the ones where you programmatically build the animation builder, that's not yet. And that's something in the works.
Okay.
Good question. Here's another one, masking. It's where you display part of the object based on the context. And finally, dolly and zoom comes from cinematography again. You've probably seen this if you have an iPhone. And in iOS, this is a very common navigation device. So you can zoom into your folder, zoom into an app, then when you close the app, you zoom out. You know about this.
Yes.
So if you're interested in a designer's point of view on this, it's really good to check out this uxinmotion.net. Some tutorials are on there. Now, when we create mobile user interfaces, we combine any number of these principles to create UI interactions. Some of these we already get for free in the operating system. For example, iOS has these. We have a switch. It's got a little animation. It's very useful. And on the right, you'll see a navigation. So other interactions we have to build ourselves. right now the tools aren't really there, so we have to take care and do it. So we have to apply the principles, but we have to do it carefully. So I'm going to talk about some guidelines so you don't screw up when you're doing it. The first one, hire a designer. You probably want to do that if you're not used to working with animations, with interactions. They're good at this stuff. Many developers claim that they don't have a sense that designers have. Okay, fine. Have a designer do it, but then you should know your tools and the techniques to be able to get it done. Now, if you are going to go the road and doing it yourself, make sure that your animations serve a real purpose. Don't just put animations all over the place. It's going to be crazy and it's going to drive people nuts. So make sure your animations actually serve a real purpose. When I was little, my mom was teaching me piano. And I asked her, Mom, how do I get really good at playing the piano? So she went over to our record player. We used to have a record player. It was a really long time ago. And she put on Horowitz playing Chopin. So she said, copy that. And that's at that point I decided to go into computers. Anyway, she explained that if you really want to get good, what you have to do is find excellent examples like that, and then you have to try to recreate them. So that's the advice that really stuck with me. So now when I work, when I try to create useful and purposeful interactions and animations, I look at other apps that are doing it well and try to copy that. So I think that the Starbucks app is a really good example that has really nice animations in it. This history screen is part of the app. On the left, you'll see what happens if you just implement it. If you just implement it, don't take care, and it's fine, right? It's fine, it's jumping around, but you really don't get a sense of where you are. Here it is, the actual app in the middle. That's how it is now. It's got really nice animation going back and forth. So you can tell where you are. You can scroll back and forth. It's really easy to manipulate the screen. And on the right side is what I've created with NativeScript to simulate that. I've added a little bit of another animation to the size of these buttons, as you can see. Now, can anybody tell me, out of the principles that I mentioned, which ones are being used there?
Easing it.
Easing, very good.
Dolly and Zoom.
Which one?
Dolly and Zoom.
You're not zooming in, right?
No.
So there's no dolly and zoom here.
No, but the font is
Parents, just parents.
Parenting. Yes, thank you very much. So here they're not using parenting, but here I've added a little bit of parenting. When you're moving this one grows, this one grows.
parenting.
Cool, thanks. Another example is this one. So this is the news app that comes with iOS. Sorry that all these examples are iOS based for those Android users. But the principles are exactly the same, right? So on the left you'll see that we have harsh cuts. It's not how the actual app works, but I made it simulated to see what would happen if it had harsh cuts. The actual app works like the one in the middle. So you have a little effect there. There we go. And on the right side, I have a cute little pets scenario that does a similar master in detail kind of animation. Yeah. This way you're kind of focused and the user knows where they are. They're spatially aware of the navigation. It's kind of, it's natural. So that brings me to the next guideline. Does it feel natural? After you've added your useful interaction and animations, you might think they're useful interactions, but just take a step back because you might have overdone it. You always want to scale back a little bit. Make sure that they actually feel natural. If you can, ask another person for their opinion because you were working on the code all day long. So, I mean, you've been manipulating objects since you were a baby, real world objects. That's a long time to get used to how physical items feel in the real world. If something feels off, you'll know. So if you have the luxury of beta testers, even better. Here's an example of what it might feel like to be unnatural. This is the linear graph that the computer will give you. See how it's moving very unnaturally? It's just moving and then just stops. Now over there we have a little bit of easing added, so it's more natural flow. See the difference?
Yeah, so like it slows down at the very end, basically.
Exactly,
Rather than
yeah.
hitting it like a
Yeah.
ram or something.
It's like a gentle gentle speed up and then a gentle slow down. Kind of like a natural object would do. All right, and I want to add one last guideline. No matter how hard you try to perfect your interface interaction animations, what's going to happen is some users eventually are going to have to complain about it and say, okay, that's too much for us. So a practice that recently took hold is allowing the user to switch or lessen the animation in the application. Apple has done this starting with an update to iOS 7 when users complained about the vomit-inducing animations that Apple introduced with that OS. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it was like too much animation going on. So here's an example of providing a switch. This is current. These are the animations in the News app, but then you can switch to reduce motion, and as you can see, we don't have that crazy zoom in anymore. It's just slightly less. So it would be good to include a switch like that, so your users that are turned off by this kind of animation can really take advantage of that switch. Does Android have something like that? Or Android's animations are perfect?
No, I mean I have a Samsung Android phone. I don't see anything where it like slows down or does it. I mean I don't see that option there. Maybe when you go into the settings and the advanced developer options and turn off the animations, maybe you can do that.
But I haven't heard too many people complaining about Android's animations.
With the more animation versus less animation thing. I mean, are there case studies? Are there any kind of studies that state that the more animation, the more time the user will stay within the app? Is there anything like
Retention?
that? Yeah, retention. Yeah, exactly.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Somebody might have studied it, but that's a really good thing to look into. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be good to check it out. So let's talk about some techniques. Now, since we're talking about NativeScript, we can actually finally see some NativeScript code. But the fundamentals are the same. Whatever technology you're going to be using, the techniques might not match, but the fundamentals are there. So there are several ways to accomplish these animations in NativeScript, and what you're going to want to do is pick whatever combination works best for you. There's many options. Declarative is one option, if you're going to do it the built-in declarative way. So this is CSS keyframe animations, for those that do CSS keyframes. You start with this one because it's going to be the cleanest one to implement. If your situation calls for a very simple animation that's one-off or maybe repeating, use this one first. The built-in NativeScript imperative animations. So you're talking about using the APIs that NativeScript provides. So these are the APIs that's an abstraction over native animations, but they provide a consistent JavaScript API to you as the NativeScript developer, so that you don't have to deal with native ones. So these are going to be more performant because you're wrapping native APIs, which are already optimized. Next one is native or plugins. So you can write native code right in your JavaScript. I don't know if those familiar with NativeScript knew that, but you can write native code. I'll show an example of that. It's not exactly a beginner topic, it's a more advanced topic, but you'll see an example. If you're an iOS developer, you'll recognize it right away. So you can also use plugins. Now a plugin can leverage the native platform APIs. which will be different for iOS and Android, obviously, right? But they will be able to expose a clean and normalized JavaScript API to you. So if you want to find out how to create these plugins, there's a really good course on native scripting by Nathan Walker. He shows you how to do that. And finally, JavaScript. I call this the brute force method. So what you're doing is you're basically writing JavaScript to manipulate the visual elements. Right? You're writing code to do it. So you're chugging through a loop of some kind to move an item a little bit at a time based on some kind of measured time with an easing function. So this will allow you more capabilities. This will allow you the most capabilities because you can do it manually. And it's more than the current NativeScript framework supports. For example, animating heights and widths of objects, but it comes at a slightly higher cost. So if you turn on an animation and then you walk to the car and you see your phone is dead, you're gonna have to run back to the house and charge it. These things will take up your battery. So let's take a look at some examples of these in NativeScript.
Alex,
Yeah.
is it in order of most power of the battery? I mean, like when you do the first one, it'll be less, the second one is less, or is it, do you know if that's the case?
This
Or?
is not a measured thing. I did try to organize them of how you want to try to approach it in the most preferable way.
Okay.
So the least preferable way is if you want to do it manually.
Manual, right, okay.
Yeah. But I didn't do actual measurements on how much battery power it's going to take.
Okay.
All right, so we'll take a look at some examples. Here is an example of doing it the NativeScript way in declarative. Now, I use Angular as an example here, but this will work exactly the same way in non-Angular applications in NativeScript. What Angular lets me do is just put everything in one file. So here's the styles. You have one element there with a class, and you have keyframes. So first you're moving off the screen to 50, then you're moving at half of the animation, you're moving to 0%, which is in the middle. Notice how it kind of slows down a little bit. That's thanks to this timing function right here. Okay, and then finally at 100%, it's gonna fly off the screen. So this is declarative, and it's pretty easy to follow. It's very clean, and it's all in CSS. There's no code. Next one is imperative. That means you're writing code, but you're writing to the NativeScript API. Same thing, you have your label, which is just an element in NativeScript. You have a styling for it, and here you're moving it. You're using each view has an animate function on it, and label is just a view. And you're just calling the animate function on it. That's part of the NativeScript API. And you're translating it over 2 seconds. Now this information, I'm only doing one animation here, and all of the information for that, the entire movement is within this curve, this Bezier curve. So the whole like pause and then keep going, that's because of the easing function. Right here. Next one is native code. So you're familiar with this one. And you also, yeah. So here you can access your native code directly in JavaScript. Okay, this is really cool. So I have an iOS example here, but you can do the same thing with Android. If you're using Android and iOS, you just have if iOS do this, if Android do that, or you can separate it out into 2 different functions, 2 different files. So, UI view, it's an iOS view. And you have this function, animate with duration, delay options, animation completion, and those that work with iOS will recognize these and how funny they are, because some of the names are really freaking long. So here you're specifying how long you want it to take, what the delay is, what kind of easing curve you want to do. So this is the curve that makes it kind of slow down a little bit and then speed up. And this is the actual motion that you're doing, you're translating again. Now here you have one, you're executing one of them, and then when that one is done, you're executing another one. I split it up into two. So there's one, and then the other one.
So to move from iOS to NativeScript, for example, you should be able to just, from what I read there, you should be able to just plug all your iOS code in there with a few things in NativeScript and then refactor as you go when you're learning more iOS or when you're learning more NativeScript.
I would recommend if you have a little piece of code that you really want to reuse from iOS, and that's it.
Okay.
Don't just take the entire app and try to put it. Yeah, you're gonna drive yourself crazy if you do that. Because these function names are actually Objective-C. So in Objective-C, you're calling a function and then you're passing in, you have to name the parameters. So what this does is combines all the named parameters into a function name. And finally, this is the really cool, powerful one, the one that takes up the most batteries, but you can do a lot of things with it. So you're moving this thing with pure JavaScript code. As you can see, the results are the same, or very close to the same. So I'll show you these functions, but what we're using here is RxJS. You can write JavaScript code in a for loop to do this, but RxJS provides really cool functions right out of the box. So you can use observables to observe some kind of event. In this case, the event that you're observing is like a timer, an animation frame loop. This is provided by the system, so you don't need to write your own loop. I'll show you that code in a second. So you're calling duration for 1 second. That returns you an observable. You're mapping the observable to an easing function. That returns you an observable. You're mapping that observable to this right here, which will tell you the amounts. So you're going from one amount, which is negative 280 off the screen, to 0 on the screen. And then you're telling what you want to do with that new value of the observable. So for each iteration of the observable, you're going to say, we're going to translate that object to the new value. Okay, the second half is just waits for a second and a half, and it moves it off the screen. Same thing though. Notice this right here. This is really cool. Does anybody know what D3 is?
Yes, it's the SVG chart library.
Yeah, it's the animation library. But guess what? I imported through npm the D3 easing library, and I can use that with NativeScript.
Are you also importing all of our RxJS as well? Or
I am.
Can you choose?
I can choose whatever I want to import, but in this case, for demo purposes,
All of them, okay.
yeah, it's not recommended that you import all of RxJS. You probably want to import only the ones you want.
Wait, I've done it.
All right, so look at this. I'm importing D3ease, which is just an npm package. It's just JavaScript deployed to npm, but you can use that in your NativeScript applications. And in fact, I'm using the easing functions that come from that right here. D3 is sign out, and that's what giving me that nice animation curve. So, what about those functions that I showed you? These are reusable chunks of code that you can just plug in anywhere. First, you want to get the time elapsed. So, you're getting an animation frame from the system, and then you're creating an observable. And the observable is basically going to be on a scheduler. What that's going to give you is the time. This will get you the ms, or milliseconds elapsed. The duration is the one we started out with. Remember that? This will return you a new observable based on the milliseconds that you specify. So we specified 1 second, 1000 milliseconds. We passed that in. this will call the MS elapsed function, which will divide it by the milliseconds passed in. So you're gonna get a chunk basically of time. So if you specify 1000 milliseconds, this will give you a chunk of time between 0 and 1. So you're basically scaling it down between 0 and 1. That's what you want. And you want to do this while the t, which is the time, is less than or equal to 1. So this observable will be active and then automatically turn off. It's part of RxJS, which is really cool. So this will turn off automatically when time equals 1. And here is another function, amount from to. It takes a range. A range is just 2 numbers. And this will return you, this will return you a function that takes the time chunk from here and it'll give you where you are for that particular time piece. So that's what gives you that motion, right? So the amount from to takes time that you're at, the time slice, moves it by a little bit, and that's where you are. So we can combine these reusable functions into something like this. Duration, map, do. Makes it really simple. And of course, with RxJS, you have to subscribe. You can subscribe this way, or you can just store a local observable value and do an async pipe, which is probably something you've been doing. So you would bind this label to that observable and then just pass it to an async pipe, which will automatically subscribe for you and then unsubscribe.
So you can do the same Angular forward and web-based apps as also NativeScript you're saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All these same exact things can be done on the web as it is.
Okay.
In fact, the only code here,
That's the
all this right here,
yeah.
all this can be used on the web. The only code here that cannot be used on the web is this template, because the browser doesn't know what a label is. Label is very specific to NativeScript,
Okay.
because it's an abstraction over the native element. But the rest of this is all can be used on the web. So, what's the point here? The point here that you guys are all developers. I don't think there's any designers here. Are there designers here? A little bit?
Except for
Designer. Okay. So developers are guilty here because we've been ignoring stuff. We've been ignoring this for too long. It's time to change this. It's no longer the domain of the designer only, unless you want to take that first option out and hire a designer. So developers need to start thinking like the users of their software. When a user clicks a button, something should happen, but the user should be made aware of the context of what's happening. Yeah, thank you for coming, and I really appreciate you all making it out here on a Wednesday night. There's some native scripting courses available on nativescripting.com, and there's a discount code right there. Get some free t-shirts, and thanks.
And if you want to learn more from him and other people with NativeScript, in 2 or 3 weeks, there's a conference in North Carolina, in Raleigh.
Yeah.
Outstanding. It's run by Dan Wilson and his people, part of NativeScript, but it's a great conference. They put on a good show, and I think it's $250 for a weekend.
Yep. NC DevCon, nice little weekend getaway.
And what everybody says, Raleigh rocks. There's so much going on in Raleigh, it's ridiculous. So,
I've never been to Raleigh. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been over there? I always thought North Carolina was there to do, you know, but apparently there's a lot.
The hotel they put us up in is right downtown, and usually it's right where the street festivals are. So you'd be sitting there and saying, okay, so there's all the Harley people out there, or there's this weird festival of something going on. So
Yeah.
you're always close to that, and you're close to the amphitheater. I think there's been some concerts going on there, so I'll have to check that out.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, but they do a good job. They usually bring in barbecue for one of the meals, one of the lunches, and something else, and then they have their happy hour afterwards, Saturday night, which usually has some local microbrew with some snacks and good time to mingle and talk to people. So, can't beat the price.
Yeah. Okay, well, there's some more beer and some more food. If you want to grab some before the night is over.
How do you find out the code? Where's the best place to get all that CSS stuff and CSS?
Oh,
Native scripting?
all right, that's a good point. So all these demos, the ones that I created, I'm gonna put them up on GitHub.
Okay.
I guess I should put my my GitHub repo up there, but if you follow me right there on Twitter, I'm gonna be posting about it.
But is there any like an official one like which has all the NativeScript Angular declared stuff? Like is there like a docs for like here's all the availabilities out of Angular for and you can use this?
Yeah. So if you go to nativescript.org,
Okay.
there is a docs section there. There's a whole site for docs, and they describe most of these declarative, especially the declarative side is pretty good in documentation.
Okay.
Imperative side and Angular side is a little bit lacking just because it's so new. The Angular 4.26
Animation.
support has just come out
Right.
like last month, so it's new. It's not there yet.
A
Okay.
lot of the videos on it, like the nativescripting.com and whatnot, a lot of them seem to be written with people that use Angular, so you should, if you know Angular, you should be able to at least pick things out of it. Go, okay, I get you, I see what you're doing there, and how it relates to NativeScript.
Yeah, so nativescripting.com has NativeScript with Angular, and it has NativeScript Core without Angular, for those that are still interested in that side of things. Any other questions?
So I can follow any web Angular easing or not just easing, but any animation on the web, and I can be a little bit the same thing inside Angular inside NativeScript if I want to basically.
Well, it has to be JavaScript,
Right.
and it has to make sense. So if you're combining these functions together,
Right.
but you're better off starting out with what comes out of the box. So you're better off going with the NativeScript route, declarative and imperative animations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Rather than trying to find some code and Stack Overflow, just copy and paste it, and then it'll be way too much on the battery power, like you said, or it's too much horsepower on CPU, whatever, right?
Yeah,
So it's just
you need to be
better-
careful with the ones that do brute force, like the one I
Like the last example.
Yeah.
My guess would be you build something using what we were talking about, the declarative, and then go see if there's a plugin out there that enhances it, and so then your next step would be to build off of that and see which ones you like better, and then how it deals with your battery.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. What are you trying to make? What's your animation doing? Are you, do you have a little box that expands like this? You know, you can use scaling, which comes with NativeScript.
Okay.
Is it something that needs to float out and do something crazy? Then you're going to need to write your own. What comes out of the box is rotation, translation, so you can move your objects back and forth, up and down. Scaling, opacity is a really common one. Opacity is where you're making things visible and invisible. And background color change.
Alright. So what is that NativeScript UI framework for? What's all that UI stuff that's on the website? Like
So NativeScript UI
Yeah.
is basically an addition to NativeScript. It's just extra controls. So Telerik, the company, you're probably familiar with them.
Yeah.
They're very good at making controls, like extra widgets and stuff. So NativeScript UI comes with extra widgets. It's got a side menu, it's got a list. The list has additional features like you can arrange your objects, your items in a very specific way, or you have swipe to delete on both iOS and Android. It has charts and graphs that are animated.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of like jQuery UI, enhancing jQuery type of stuff.
I'm not even gonna talk about jQuery UI.
From an aesthetic point of view, or
Yeah.
or the
Well, like jQuary UI or not, it's a different story, but it's kind of like that. It's enhancing the core.
It's enhancing the core. That's a good way of putting it. I heard jQuery UI, I'm like,
And is it free or is it a paid?
there is a free version that comes with a few controls, and there's a paid version that comes with more stuff like charts.
I see, okay. Is that hard to implement, like, or is it a matter of just pulling in an NPM?
NPM.
And then you're done?
NPM install, blah, 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 you're done.
Okay.
It's in there.
I'm gonna try that out, okay.
So I think we were talking before, he's got, between you and some associates, you have like 7 or 8 trainings out here on here, and you said.
So, yeah, there's a couple of courses on Pluralsight
Pluralsight.
and LinkedIn. They're still good, but you really can't follow them as much anymore because they're a little outdated, and NativeScript keeps coming out with new versions. So the most up-to-date ones are going to be on nativescripting.com.
Okay.
They put out something that was a free for a short time. It was a guy named Nick Raboy. He wrote a 101, which was really simple and easy to follow, other than the fact that, yes, when you download 3.0, there were some things I had to sit there and figure out for a while. But it was very simple because it just basically adding lists and going out and calling API. So it gave me the very basics. So because things were such a problem, I had to go through the same section like 5 times. So it really made a lot of sense of how to deal with that. So it's little things like that from what I've seen, and I've done this much. The Bronsteins, they have a book that was supposed to go on, I guess, Manning.
Yeah, that got canceled,
but they have a book, so hopefully soon they're going to tell us what they're doing with it.
And a new book just came out from Nathan Walker, who is one of the authors on NativeScripting, and another Nathaniel. There's 2 Nathans in the community. So they both collaborated on a book. It's out now on Pact, I think, publishing.
Packet Publishing? Maybe we'll get it out for free soon.
You can stash it in your folder of books that you'll never read.
Even though there's 5,000 books now for $10 or something, I've seen way too much about that today. Maybe it's one of those. But yeah, I know that a lot of you guys were talking about coming here and trying to enhance, going from iOS to Android or whatnot, but there's a lot of resources from what I've seen, and the docs seem to be really good in terms of seeing what's there, what are the basic NativeScript features and whatnot. So unless I'm incorrect, it seems like there's so much out there to be able to get into NativeScript, and you should be able to get into it even easier than I did, because you guys seem to understand mobile a little more than I do.
Yeah, if you're coming from an iOS or Android background, some of the native things that you feel like maybe you want more, you want to push it a little bit more, you're gonna have a good time with it, because you're gonna be able to write native code right in your JavaScript. So it's pretty cool.
And I haven't we didn't get into the deploying stuff, but what's the ease of deployment to the app stores with NativeScript?
So yeah, and that's something I'm covering in the Angular and Core Pro courses on NativeScripting. It's a process. There's a bit of a process.
Compared
especially
to
with
these guys that
iOS.
are doing iOS to get it up there, is there a comparison? Is it
Yeah,
easier or harder?
there's extra steps, because what you're doing is you have to use Webpack. I mean, you don't have to, but it'll really help out your application if you're using Webpack. So all these production-ready steps that you have to take, you build you uglify your JavaScript code, you package it up using NPM scripts instead of Xcode. So it's a little different, but there is a way to do it.
But from these guys' perspective, it shouldn't be that much different in terms of they should be able to look at it and go, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of see what's going on here and compare it to iOS and go, yeah, all right, it's a little different, but
What's going to happen is, for you guys, it's going to be easier to find things like bundle names, and because most people that are coming in and they don't have iOS development experience, they don't know what the heck a bundle name is. So you're going to be able to go in, open your solution up in Xcode, check out the bundle name, and that's going to be easy for you because you already know. So that step is a little better, but still you have to learn the other steps. Cool. All right.
Everybody excited? You guys excited?
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.